Did you know Croatia had seen off Brazil and Argentina in back-to-back World Cups? Probably. Did you know Ireland had defeated England and Italy at Euro 88 and USA 94? Probably not. Did you know that in 1966 North Korea beat Italy at the World Cup and then South Korea did the same in 2002? Well, you do now. We're leaving Europe and heading to the Orient for this next video in our World Cup Underdogs series as we journey through yesteryear seeking the magic stories of dark horses and surprise outfits that attempted and succeeded in giant killings, arriving to stages of the World Cup that they would never have believed possible. North Korea and South Korea share both their name, of course, and a land border, and that's about it. The only thing we could find in common between the two nations was that they have both succeeded in fantastic FIFA World Cup runs. Let's give you a bit of context first. Nowadays, South Korea has a population of over 50 million people, around double the population of North Korea. But Korea had been a single nation that was annexed by Japan in 1910. Since the end of World War II, the Korean peninsula has been divided into North Korea and South Korea. The nations formed to find themselves in the middle of the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953, ending in an armistice agreement but without a peace treaty. North Korea is a one-party totalitarian state, and South Korea was formerly governed by a succession of military dictatorships until democratization in 1987. Since then, of course, elections have been held, and nowadays South Korea is more in line with Japan as a super modern democratic nation, a far cry from the dictatorship that continues north of the border. North and South Korea both claim the peninsula on which they are based, as well as the outlying islands. Both nations joined the United Nations in 1991 and are recognised by most member states, and since the 1970s they have held informal diplomatic dialogues in order to ease their military tensions. Basically, these neighbours have a troubled history, and though originally joint as one, North Korea and South Korea now couldn't be more different. But back to the football. Not shockingly, North Korea's underdog story has not come anytime recently. The current political and social situation in North Korea isn't great for breeding top-level footballers. In 1966, however, they did have a somewhat miraculous World Cup campaign. When North Korea qualified for the '66 World Cup in England, they weren't actually a recognised state in the eyes of the West, and apparently Britain even considered rejecting their visas so they couldn't have North Korea at the tournament. In the end, they worked out this wouldn't work, and FIFA might even move the tournament elsewhere if they tried to do so. But surely North Korea wouldn't even score a goal anyway, right? Wrong. North Korea had beaten Australia in a playoff to qualify for the competition, 9-2 on aggregate in fact, yet the papers in England said Italy and the Soviets should have the run of the place. Italy and the Soviet Union would be North Korea's group opponents. The papers seemed to be correct after the first group game though. The North Koreans were seen off easily in their first ever World Cup finals match, 3-0 to the Soviets it was. North Korea found themselves in Middlesbrough for all three of their group games. The language barrier didn't dampen their spirits though. They were buoyed by some new local support as they wore the red of Middlesbrough FC. They even gifted the Lord Mayor an embroidered picture of a bird on their arrival. Relations were good. In the second group game, the Koreans collected their first ever point in a World Cup finals. An 88th minute equaliser rescued a point against Chile. And more importantly, it meant that the North Koreans would go into their final group game with everything still to play for. The only issue is that they were playing Italy, and nobody gave them a chance. Nobody, therefore, could foresee one of the biggest giant killings in football history, as North Korea would knock Italy out of the 1966 World Cup with a famous 1-0 win. The goal coming from Pak Du-ik just before halftime. The world watched on in complete shock. The Italians simply couldn't believe it, and neither could the North Koreans themselves. Just 10 years earlier, their country was still at war. It was truly a remarkable feat. North Korea 1, Italy 0. In a fascinating quarter-final tie, North Korea at one stage looked well on their way to completing an even more famous victory. Had it occurred, it would be the most famous result in World Cup history. At Goodison Park Stadium in Liverpool, over 50,000 spectators saw North Korea take a 3-0 lead against Portugal in just 25 minutes. It was the sort of match a computer game wouldn't even predict. Eusebio's Portugal had arrived in England as a title contender, and North Korea as little more than a laughingstock. But there they were, 3 goals to the good. In the end, it was indeed Eusebio that took the game by the scruff of the neck, as he scored 4 of Portugal's 5 goals in a stunning comeback victory. Portugal 5, North Korea 3. The Asian side would go home after a remarkable campaign that saw them give Italy the boot, Portugal an almighty scare, and of course they finished amongst the 8 top teams in world football. To add a little context, North Korea have only ever reached one World Cup since, and they finished with the worst record of all 32 teams. So bravo to the side of 66. We have to fast forward to 2002 to talk about South Korea's special World Cup. They hosted the tournament alongside Japan, another show of how different a nation they are to North Korea. We can't see them hosting a World Cup anytime soon. 2002 was South Korea's 5th consecutive and 6th total appearance at a World Cup finals. But at that stage they had only racked up a grand total of 0 wins from 14 previous tournament games, tallying 11 goals but conceding 43. That included a 9-0 defeat to Hungary in their first ever World Cup match in 1954. Ouch. With that in mind, nobody was expecting much from South Korea in 2002 either. Against all the odds, South Korea romped to a group victory at their home tournament in 2002. They would top a tricky table that included Portugal, Poland and the USA. A draw against the USA and 2 stunning victories against their European opponents saw them through to the last 16. An Jung-hwan and Park Ji-sung of Manchester United stood out as 2 key players in what was a dogged and determined South Korea side. In their first ever appearance in a FIFA World Cup knockout stages, South Korea would come up against Italy. Despite being 4-time FIFA World Cup winners, the Italians, you'll notice, have also got a serious history of losing to opponents that they really should beat. Ireland, North Korea, South Korea, just to mention a few. But anyway, this game was won by the hosts in controversial fashion after a few dodgy decisions. A 117th minute winner later, South Korea found themselves in the last 8 of the World Cup. There they would face Spain. Again, the world looked on with a bit of cynicism, as the hosts did seem to benefit from interesting refereeing calls. But South Korea took Spain to penalties and beat them 5-3 in the shootout. From whipping boys to the semi-finals of a home World Cup, South Korea's journey was stunning and surreal. The final 4 was one step too far in the end, and a solitary Michael Ballack strike was enough to finally end South Korea's glorious underdog story. At home, they were heroes, and they earned global respect for South Korea as a footballing nation. Since then, South Korea have qualified for every possible World Cup, and have drawn games with France and Uruguay, even beating Germany and Portugal. Between North and South Korea, tensions remain. But big steps have been made in relations since the 2018 signing of the Declaration for Peace, Prosperity and Unification of the Korean Peninsula. Both nations seem to be looking forward, but both can also look back fondly on the football if nothing else, and how respectively they made the last 8 and the last 4 of the FIFA World Cup finals. North Korea and South Korea, footballing giant killers on the World Cup stage. Who would have thought? They have their own magic underdog tales. And to find out more World Cup underdog stories, stay tuned in the next video.